SETDA on the record has always been a big supporter of E-rate. It's actually, if people don't know this, it's the largest allocation of money that comes to schools that's actually not allocated by Congress for technology. So like Congress has really no purview in terms of like it can help the FCC decide what's important and everything else, but the money goes directly to schools for technology, and it's a huge part of district budgets and everything else. Cybersecurity is still obviously part of the conversation, so we're very still pleased to see that in terms of the pilot and everything else. But we know that there's bipartisan support for the E-rate program. It's been around a long time. Some of the positions that we've taken, we would love the FCC to modernize the definition of what a firewall is. I think that would go a long way in helping districts and the state advocate for ways to help protect the networks that the E-rate program pays for.
Okay.
I do believe that the E-rate program will continue on. And I think what's interesting about the Wi-Fi and hotspots, and it was really brought to light, obviously, during the pandemic when we have like home access being, because if you think about it, it's really about off-campus connections at that point. Because the E-rate program has done wonders and has been really successful in connecting our school campuses. I think, and I'm going to try to be a little bit careful about how I say this, though, is I don't know if there's other ways for us to think about this legislatively. Are there other programs where we can help solve the home connectivity issue? And maybe some folks are out there wondering why home connectivity? Well, if you have investments in devices that are going back and forth they're going to a regular high school. They're not doing virtual or anything. They're going back and forth, or they're going to a regular school. We want to make sure that students have the capability at home to complete their homework, to communicate with their teachers, to do research projects with their classmates, to just be a high school student and have the experience of using those devices in a way that one promotes their learning but also prepares them for post-secondary. So it's really the home access issue that we're trying to solve, and the question really is then, is it the FCC's job to solve that, or does Congress have another way to solve that? And are there other ways that we could be able to do that through other means? And maybe the E-rate program isn't appropriate. I think people are surprised to find out that K-12 has cybersecurity issues, and I don't think people realize how valuable the data actually is. I mean, I don't know how many parents are out there are checking their kids' credit reports every year if there's a data breach and that sort of thing, which I encourage all parents to necessarily do. But I think where states can step in is really ask the question about what's the state's role. The state can't do everything and provide everything, but what could the state do with their resources and capacity to maybe alleviate some of the risk that districts, or mitigate some of the risk that the districts are taking on. Other examples are Arkansas has an incident response team. So when there is a breach, they send in this team that has expertise, especially for small districts that don't have the staff. Maybe they have a half timer, or it's a teacher that's taken on some IT responsibilities, that they come in and they can actually sort of do forensics and figure out what's going on and helpfully, mitigate the breach and see what happened and everything else. So there's just different examples, and we point that out in our in some of our resources. And we particularly had focused on small and rural districts because they tend to be the ones that are most under-resourced when it comes to K-12 cybersecurity, but also carry the same risks as other districts. So we were really talking about what EdTech developers need to be on notice about. And I've shared this story in panels publicly, so I'm going to share it here. But I'm not going to name who it is, a developer said, well, they're not asking for it. And I'm like, oh, that's a challenge. That challenge accepted. Now I'm going to I'm going to make a better consumer. So they're asking you about interoperability. They're asking you about accessibility. They're asking you about usability. They're asking you about safety. All of the things that we hold, is it evidence-based research, what evidence went into this? Because I want to make a smarter consumer when they're walking the floor, so they're not seduced by a marketing pitch. I think sometimes in ed tech, we think that, you're promising all the bells and whistles and then you don't deliver, but we really want to reward those companies that are going to be partners with us in this space. And it doesn't mean that you have to come out with a perfect solution, but that somebody's going to be in the muck with us as we try to figure out how it's going to work in our instructional space. I think right now folks are really concerned about funding. It's always been one of the higher unmet needs that we've had. And then there's just a lot of uncertainty. So even federal programs, ESSER funds were ESSER funds, they expired. We knew that was happening, but regular funds had gone out to districts, and they were actually held in July, which caused a little bit more uncertainty, even though they should have been, allocated and dispersed. So I think what states are thinking about too is state budgets. They got smaller in 2025, but we're anticipating they're going to get even smaller in 2026 with what's happening out there. So I think for funding is just one of those things, like trying to track where are states spending. Again, I always believe that budgets really reflect your priorities. And if we're starting to see that, is there going to be a shrinkage? Now, people really do need to understand that federal funds only make up, 10 to 15% of state budgets. So it's really what's going on at the local and state level that's going to impact local school districts at the end of the day. So, but it's a signal, and everything else. So, but if states are struggling, then that means that we're going to be struggling at the local level as well.